this tutorial, we'll be looking at ways we can implement CSS styling into our HTML. CSS, or cascading style sheets, is a language for specifying how documents are presented to users, how they are styled, laid out, and to some degree, how elements act when interacted with. We'll be going over the 3 ways of including CSS styling within our HTML code. These are inline, internal, and external. We'll begin with inline styling. In our previous tutorial, we created this h1 header tag, which displayed our h1 elements within the browser. We also looked at the CSS styling that was set by default when we added our h1 tag. We can change the color of our text in the h1 tag by typing style and then specifying the new style that we want to add to the text itself. We can type color :blue with a semicolon to end that attribute. We'll save this, we'll go back to the browser and refresh, and now we've changed the color to blue. We can also see down in our styles, we have the new color displayed. This is the new attribute we've associated with the h1. We can add the style attribute to most other elements to incorporate a style specific to that element. With the body, we'll again type style and we'll set the background color to red and a semicolon to end it. We'll save this, go back to our code. Now we've filled the background of our body tag to contain red. Inline style is handy if you just want to quickly change the style of a particular element, but it's better if we lay out all of our styling in one location so we can keep track of everything that we've added styles to. So I'll delete both of these style attributes. And we want to go back to our head tag. In the previous video, we discussed how everything that we didn't want to display on the page, but which was still part of our HTML, was incorporated within the head. This includes styles, and to define styles, we need to use the style tag. Again, we have our opening and closing tags, and then we can specify what styles we want to define for each element. In order to target an element, we must specify it. In the case of h1, we'll target all h1 tags. I'll add the color of maroon, semicolon, and I'll save this. Now, as we've deleted both of our styles that were in line with their respective elements, we've reverted back to a white background for the body element, and we've now defined maroon as the color for the text in the h1 tag. We can also target the entire body by simply typing body and then defining whatever attributes we want to associate it with. To check our styling, we can click on the element within the HTML that we want to check, and you can see here that we've got the background color defined as linen for the body tag, and the H1 tag is set to maroon for its text. Color and background color are two different styles that we can use when determining color. So if we added maroon again, you can see that the maroon of the background is hiding the maroon of the color of the text. If we switch this to blue, looks terrible, but you can see that the background color is displaying under the regular text color of the H1 tag. I'll remove the background color for the body tag and the color of the H1 tag. I'm just going to comment the style tags out of our code, which you can do by highlighting the code that you don't want to include in your HTML and pressing Control and /. So we've defined both inline CSS and internal CSS by using the style tags. We've got one more option which we'll be using in future tutorials heavily. For this, we'll be using a link tag. This has the attribute of a relationship which we'll define as style sheet. And we also need to specify a file which will be storing our external CSS within. We haven't created this file yet, but we'll define it now. We need href is equal to styles.css. The href attribute either defines a URL that we want to link to or a document that we wish to access. In this case, we're defined styles.css, which we can create now, and this link tag will access what we specify. We'll right click on our project folder and create a new file. We'll call this styles.css. And now, similarly as we've done here, we'll create a H1 reference to reference all of our H1 tags within our styles.css file. We'll change the color to red and we'll save. We also need to save the index.html file in order to save our link. After a refresh, the heading is now displayed in red, which is referenced in our external styles.css file. So we've been over inline CSS, internal CSS, and we've hooked up our external CSS. As stated before, when we've specified what color we want our H1 tags to be, we are specifying all tags that are of the type H1. I'll add a new H1 tag, include some text. I'll save this, we'll go back to our browser, and as you can see, both H1 tags are displayed in red because that's what we specified here. If we want to target individual tags of the same type, we can type class and then define a name for this class. I'll call this heading 1. I'll save this. Back in our styles.css file, we can state a class by typing a full stop and then the class name, which was heading 1. I'll change this color to green and then save, refresh. Now here within our styles, we can see we've specified the H1 tag to have the color red, but we've overridden that by specifying the class name and the color to green. This is the cascading style sheet concept. The H1 definition of color is overridden by the heading 1 class definition. Classes are useful if we want to define multiple elements to have the same type of styling. So in order to give the H1 styling to both of our H1 tags, we can simply use the same class name. I'll save this, refresh, and now they are both green. I'll add a third H1 element just underneath our previous two. Type some text. And here I'll add the attribute of ID. ID is used to specify a specific HTML element rather than elements that can share the same class. I'll give this the ID of third heading. I'll save this, and in our styles.css I'll specify the hashtag or the pound symbol indicates that we want to target an ID, and then we specify the name, third heading. I'll set this color to yellow. I'll save this, go back to our browser, refresh, and now we have our third H1 tag that is specified by an ID rather than a class. While we can still use the same IDs within other elements, this isn't recommended, as class should be used to specify multiple tags that require the same class, and IDs should remain for a single element. So just to recap, we can add inline style by adding the style attribute within most of our HTML elements. We can also add internal CSS styling within the header tags of our HTML document. We can comment out code that we want to keep within our code, but to prevent it from displaying by holding Control and then hitting the / button, we can use the link element to specify a style sheet that we wish to use externally. We can specify the names of elements to associate styles with all of the elements of that type, such as the H1 type. We can specify classes by putting a full stop to indicate class as well as the name of the class. And we can also specify IDs by typing a hashtag or £sign and the name of that ID. When we want to access multiple elements, but we don't want to access the type of element, we should assign it a class rather than an ID. An ID should be a single element. Now with our development environment, our HTML and our CSS all set up, we can start moving on into structures of HTML, such as nesting HTML elements and the difference between block versus inline elements, which we'll be getting to in the next tutorial.